Hello and welcome. My name is Scott Howie and I'm the General Manager of Regional Arts Australia. And I start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land, the First Nations people, and pay my respect to elders past and present. I'm coming to you today from the unceded lands of the Wiradjuri Nation in New South Wales. Please say hello in the chat and let us know where you're joining us from today. Closed captions are available and you also have access to Auslan. If you want to keep the Auslan viewers, the Auslan interpreters on your screen, you will need to pin them in the gallery view. Questions are going to be welcome throughout the conversation, so please use the Q&A box to pose your questions to be discussed by the panel. There will be questions throughout, as well as a short Q&A at the end of the discussion. Today's conversation could be more timely, as the new government has promised to deliver a national cultural plan before the end of the year. And, you know, the question of how should art service and represent regional communities needs to be effectively in that plan. And so we ask you to keep an eye out in our newsletter, our socials, to find out how you can contribute and ensure regional voices are heard in the consultation phase of that program. I'd now like to welcome Platform Arts Curator Amber Smith and the panelists Beck Cole, Sarah Walker and Dr. Anandita Banerjee to discuss how art should service and represent regional remote communities and respond to ideas of interconnectedness, community and place in relation to their practice. Thank you. Take it away, Amber.
Hi everyone, and thank you, Scott, for the introduction and the welcome. My name is Amber Smith, and I'm the curator at Platform Arts in Geelong, and an artist, curator, researcher and educator. I'd like to acknowledge that I'm presenting on the unceded lands of the Wadawurrung people of the Kulin Nation and pay my respects to their elders past, present and future. Pay my respects to all First Nations people, to the various countries you're all joining us from today, and extend my respects to those present in this discussion as well. I'd like to begin by introducing you to our Powerhouse panelists today. We'll be unpacking our topic for us over the next little while. They come with a wealth of experience and knowledge in the arts sector, particularly in regional contexts. And so I'll just introduce each of you kind of one by one. So we've got Beck Cole. So Beck is a proud Palawa woman, the Director of Creative Arts at Latrobe City Council in Gippsland, Victoria, which encompasses the Latrobe Regional Gallery and the new Gippsland Performing Arts Centre. Beck's a champion of creating access to quality contemporary art and performance, and has led the establishment of public art programs, creative industry development initiatives, and public programming in gallery, major events and activity centre settings. Previously, Beck led the Arts and Culture program at Wyndham City Council, and here she implemented a bold exhibition program at Wyndham Art Gallery, establishing a curatorial model of practice that supports a diversity of perspectives and raised the profile of the gallery to national presence. Beck regularly writes articles on culture, creativity, community, has an extensive background in community engagement and policy, is the chair of NETS Victoria and a board member of RANT Arts, a peak body for arts in Tasmania. And Beck brings with her an experience of working across multiple regional arts contexts. So we're very lucky to have you here today. Thanks, Beck. Sarah Walker is a Geelong-based writer, artist and photographer. Her writing is primarily creative non-fiction, considers issues of anxiety, control, intimacy. She's written for Meanjin and The Age, reviews arts for the Australian Book Review, and has co-hosted the podcast Contact Mike. Her practice uses comedy, narrative, speculative fiction to create surprising encounters with tensions around death, disaster, and catastrophe. She works particularly with immersive binaural sound works, video and text-based installation. Was a finalist in the International MTV Redefine Award and 45 Downstairs Emerging Art Award, and has taken part in residencies across Australia and Asia. She's one of Australia's most respected commercial theatre and festival photographers, shooting for hundreds of clients across Australia and the world, including Melbourne Festival, Malthouse Theatre, Chunky Move, Arts House, Raucous Back to Back, Melbourne Fringe Festival, and Next Wave Festival. and her work is on permanent display at Arts House in Melbourne. Sarah is bringing a knowledge of working regionally in Geelong as an independent multidisciplinary artist, as well as working nationally and internationally in many different contexts. So thank you, Sarah. Thanks for being here today. The last panelist I'd like to introduce you to is Anandita Banerjee, an interdisciplinary artist and researcher. And her research interests include cultural otherness, authentic identity, and the sense of home, the memories of ritualistic ceremonies and mark makings, and her reconstruction of them inform her practice. And using gestural portrayals of hybrid rituals, she wonders where her place is as an immigrant to the unceded Indigenous lands of present-day Australia. Through her work, she tests the existence of cultural otherness and challenges the notion of fitting into socio-cultural spaces, literally and metaphorically. She's exhibited at Vic Parliament in Melbourne, Customs House in Sydney, the Perth Institute of Contemporary Arts, and various other institutions and galleries. And she was also part of the Palazzo Bembo Gallery in Venice in conjunction with the Venice Biennale in 2019. But Anandita comes to us today bringing a knowledge of living and working independently in Ballarat. But you've also worked, I know, with City of Ballarat, Ballarat Art Gallery, Wyndham Council, and the Wyndham Art Gallery as well. And yeah, I guess working across both independent and organisational kind of contexts as well. So thank you all for offering your time and experience to today's discussion. It's a real pleasure and privilege to have you all here. Today we're discussing a really meaty topic around connecting people, place and practice in regional arts contexts. I'm certain this is a conversation that's been had in the past and that we'll continue to have in the future. But I'm really interested in our panellists' insight on this topic at this particular juncture, especially in a post-pandemic arts landscape. And I encourage everyone who is listening in on this discussion to please interject with any questions, discussion points or insights you might have to add to the conversation as well. You're all kind of also joining us with unique and valuable experience and knowledge in this area of inquiry as well. So there is a Q&A box where you can kind of drop these in and I'll keep my eye on it and be sure to kind of share any of those as we go along. Okay, I'd like to begin by directing a question to all of the panelists. So anyone can kind of kick this one off. And I'd like to start with the most obvious question, but a necessary one, to get a sense of your thoughts around the topic that we're kind of discussing today. So in your experience, how exactly do we connect people, place and practice in a regional art context? What are the key connectors or elements in a successful model of this? What is working and what isn't? So feel free, whoever would like to kick that one off.
I can kick off if you'd like. I've always got plenty to say. I think, the key elements are kind of what we're already talking about, which is people, place and practice. Without people, it's very, very hard to get a sense of place. And without people, there are no creative practices because it's people that produce creative product and people who produce, those experiences and those moments that actually form that connection and build that sense of place. So one thing that I bang on about quite a lot is that it doesn't matter what you build, that you can build the most amazing new facility. And, we've got an amazing new facility just down the road in Traralgon. I'm at Latrobe Regional Gallery today, which is another amazing facility. But it doesn't mean anything unless people are there to experience it. So we have these great places, and I call this kind of like this approach culture making. So, we as, people who are, leading and supporting culture making in community places, we always need to be mindful that it's actually the people that drive what we do. And if we're not listening, and if we're doing all of the kind of projection and the talking, we're never going to fill these places with the people who are going to enjoy the practice that other people make.
Absolutely. Thanks, Beck, for starting that off. And just going on about the people, I guess, I think it's quite important for us to understand, especially now in the post-pandemic world, that there is a cultural shift that has happened or is happening now, where people are slowly wanting to live outside of the cities. They're moving into regional towns and moving into new places. So there is this really new diverse group of people that are living in these areas that have possibly not changed for a long time and is currently going through a change. So I guess while we are talking about people and connection and practice and connecting all of those places, it is quite important to remember that we've got to constantly make space for these new narratives and for these new, what we very loosely call new arrivals, but you know, for these new wave, I guess, of stories that are moving into these regional areas.
I think there's a lot of complexities that become very apparent when you move out of the big cities about how art works, how the relationship between artists and audiences and institutions come together. I think when you move out of the kind of chaos of the big city, you start to see where those lines exist and where they don't exist with a bit more clarity. And it's been interesting. So I moved from Melbourne to Geelong right at the end of 2019, just before the pandemic. And across the last few years, it's been really interesting to notice where the energy is in Geelong and where the energy isn't. And Geelong is very good at talking. Geelong fucking loves a chat, loves a meeting where everyone's sitting around a table and being like, God, cool, all the amazing things we could do. And then when you say, okay, but what are we going to do? What are we going to do tomorrow? Everyone's like, oh, like there's this strange lack of energy towards action. And that's partly because the people who kind of have power and funding are stretched pretty thin in regional centres. There isn't the kind of density and strata of arts institutions that exist in the city. And so you start really noticing where blockades form kind of psychically, and also where energy kind of falls away. I think especially in the pandemic, as an artist, I'm very aware that setting things up requires you to act not only as an artist, but also as a kind of PR person and an institutional worker and an administrative worker. And I know for me, and I know for a lot of other people, I'm very tired, and that kind of energy required to lift something into being and to start building relationships with people who wouldn't necessarily consider themselves art audience members, that requires a lot of energy. And I feel like at the moment, people I know are feeling a bit kind of hollowed out from the centre. So that is also a problem when it comes to how we set up and hold spaces of art.
Yeah, and fantastic responses. It's definitely like, I guess, a lot of it comes down to resourcing as well, doesn't it? Resourcing, implementation, you know, those really important things that do kind of, you know, connect audience and artists and place. And I guess in a regional context, there is this sense that things need to be really meaningful and the relationships need to be meaningful. You know, we can't just kind of, you know, put up any kind of exhibition or ship in any show. Like it's really got to be, you know, there is a sense that that's something that, you know, regional audiences want. But yeah, fantastic responses. I'll just roll into the next kind of question because it sort of works, you know, it departs from that. And it's a bit of a two-part question, and it's for you, Beck. You've worked extensively in leadership across arts and culture in councils, you know, in Tasmania, regional Victoria, across, you know, Wyndham and Latrobe. What have you learnt to be crucial in creating access between artists and, you know, funding support opportunities that are offered by, you know, councils or institutions? How do we kind of connect these projects then with audience?
Yeah, it's a really great and multi-pronged question. I just want to quickly circle back to, you know, the idea that, yeah, things always need to be meaningful in regional contexts. So I kind of disagree with that in a little way. I think sometimes our cultural experiences and creative activities can just be fun. Sometimes it's just enough just to play, you know, and I think that's certainly something, you know, that I've learned, particularly coming out to Latrobe. So I've been here for about 2.5 years, and, you know, right before the pandemic is when I got here. So that was a bit of a an interesting way to come into like a new organisation, new area. But what I've found as we're coming out of this kind of like period of, you know, isolation, is that people are looking for fun. They're looking for connections. They're wanting it not to be so serious all the time, you know, and I've found that regional audiences really respond to work that invites playfulness, but that can still have a bit of a message that sits with it, you know. In terms of like, you know, leveraging resources, something that, you know, councils in particular have always access to a lot of space and a lot of staff. And something that I've always kind of like brought through in like anywhere that I've been working is like, well, how do we actually leverage those resources, those places, the space, the staff? How do we give that over? How do we make a platform available for others? So, you know, certainly the sort of work that I started with at Wyndham, and, you know, Dita would be really familiar with, you know, this kind of change that needed to happen in that space, is that the demography of the place is changing so rapidly, like so rapidly, that in order for anything that we did to have any kind of meaning or cut through or interest, we had to give it over. And we had to invite people in to tell us, you know, what should we be doing with these spaces and these things and this money that we have? Like, you tell me, what is the most necessary thing right now? What would shift the needle the most for you right now? And it started with simple things. I remember really clearly like having a meeting with a whole bunch of artists from the community, and they said, we just need to meet each other. I'm like, well, that's easy. We can meet here. And, you know, from that point forward, we were creating like an arts incubator. So it started with a Facebook group. And then it's like, okay, well, we've got this space that's being unused. Like, can we give that over to artists to use and use how they need to use it? And then, oh, look, our gallery, you know, maybe we can hand over our gallery like for others to like be the curator, with, you know, with a level of support. So that's a really successful kind of outcome. And then when I expand that up into, you know, like, you know, out here in Latrobe, like where, you know, the facilities and venues that I work with here, like quite a lot larger than they were in Wyndham, and they have a real regional kind of sense, and I guess weight to them, but it's still the same principle. So the things that I notice are, you know, people didn't feel like, so people who live in Morwell, Traralgon, Moe, didn't feel like this gallery that I'm sitting in right now is a place where they're allowed in. And so what do? Like, we open up the doors, we do a really big public program, we communicate in a different way, and we say, actually, this is for you. And then you're going to see, like, once we're through, you know, the pandemic and everything, our program is actually going to speak to the things that are important to you. So at the moment, we've got an exhibition called Hazelwood, where we've got a massive mural that was donated to the gallery a couple of years ago. And Hazelwood is the power station that was at the heart of the mine fire. And then it was closed, and then the towers were dismantled. And so it's got this kind of real resonance with the community. So what do? We do an exhibition about that with enough time for people to recover. And then we invited all the other former workers around for afternoon tea. So these really simple gestures where we're creating multiple doors for people to come in. And it's the same it's the same process at the Performing Arts Centre. You know, we're only 3 months post-opening, but our plans are to open up that space in the same way and say, okay, well, let's open the doors and you can come in and you tell us what you think we should be doing here. And that's it.
And it sounds so like wonderfully simple when put like that, doesn't it? It's just that like community consultation, but also just like generous offerings of like welcoming people from a region into, you know, a space that is, you know, supposed to be there for them. So yeah, I guess they should be part of, you know, having a say, you know, in how things work there, what's kind of shown, how they can get involved. And a lot of it is, just making people feel welcome, like they can come through the front doors. You know, that's often kind of the hardest part, isn't it? Just getting people kind of in. And making sure that, you know, there's this kind of local offerings as well. Things
I think there's like, you know, there's levels of engagement, and, you know, like some people are going to engage with what you're doing on a really deep level, and that's awesome, you know, and we can present what we do in a way that speaks to them, but then we can also present it in a way where it's just like, you can actually just come and look at it and go, that's cool. And
Yeah.
that's a completely valid response. And for vast majority of people will sit somewhere between those two things. And we've got to make space enough and open enough doors. And like maybe it's the back door, maybe it's the side door, maybe some people need to come in through the roof. We don't know. But we try and open up as many kind of like entry points as we can, whether it's a public program that we do in the outdoors, or whether it's, you know, like, you know, at the gallery here, we have a dedicated kids space, which I can tell you just gets absolutely slammed. And then what happens? The parents walk their kids around the exhibitions, because there's an activity that they can do with their kids on the weekend when they're like tearing their hair out about what to do. But it just signals this is a place where you can come.
Yeah, no, it's so fantastic. Yeah. And yet, I guess the power of art is when, you know, when we open up to be something really accessible that can, you know, just be for everyone. Yeah, fantastic. Sarah, as someone who works, you know, independently, obviously with, you know, a multitude of renowned organizations, and you're working across many different contexts, you know, regionally, nationally, internationally. What's kind of your experience of access to these kind of, you know, spaces, opportunities, audiences? You know, how do you find working in a regional context, and how do you access opportunities, community, the arts, ecology, and audience?
I just wanted to say, Beck, that hearing you talk about the work that you're doing is just such a balm for my soul, because I feel like I've worked and seen so many organizations who are like, we've put on this show and we've put the didactic on the wall and no one's coming in. And it's like, well, like they don't think they're allowed in there. Like most people look at art and go, I don't get it. I don't get it. I'm scared of it. I'm not allowed to go in there. So the public outreach is it's such an integral part of what it is to own an art space, to go, hey, you can come in here and you can have an opinion about what this is. And because when you like, in Geelong, there's a space called Third Space Gallery and Digital, which is a window gallery. The reason it's in a window is because the building it's in is condemned, and so no one's allowed in. So this is also a kind of complexity about that. We're in a regional space. There's all these amazing empty buildings that you legally can't enter because you might get sick. But Sarah Jones, who curates it, talks about all of these extraordinary conversations she has especially when installing and deinstalling these shows, where people come up from the bus interchange and go, oh yeah, what's this then? And she's like, oh, well, what do you reckon about it? And they'll be like, oh yeah. And then, you know, this conversation emerges, and it's just that, what do you reckon about it? Opens up this extraordinary space where people go, oh, I'm allowed to reckon something. I don't even feel stupid looking at art. Yeah, you talk about my work, Amber, having a lot of different facets, which it does. I describe my arts practice as being like, I'm a golden retriever on the beach, and someone will go, come here, do you want to come have a walk? And I'm like, great. So I'll run over there and do something. Someone else is like, hey, come over here. And I'm like, okay, great. So I'm very lucky to be working with a lot of really extraordinary people who will call me up and be like, we're going to the Philippines, get on a plane. Or, hey, we're going to Queenstown in Tasmania, get on a plane. And I've been very fortunate to see and be kind of mentored by these extraordinary people who are really, really good at going into a site and being like, what's happening here? Not, I'm going to go make something. Walking in and being like, what is here? Who is here? What exists? Who knows who? What does this community need? I worked across the pandemic on a large-scale video kind of installation work for the Unconformity Festival in Queenstown in Tasmania. Great example of an extraordinary world-class regional festival, and a great example of how you just need one person with the energy and the connections to build something, which is Travis Tiddy out there, who grew up in Queenstown and was like, I reckon that town is ripe for a festival. But everyone knew him because his family have been in the area for decades. And so people were like, all right, this all sounds like arty fucking bullshit, but I reckon Travis is okay. And then he's brought in all these kind of world-class artists. But working there, I was working on a project run by Ian Pidd and Martin Coots, so both fucking extraordinary artists and makers. And we walked into the town. They'd been working with that community for nearly 10 years. And we walked into the pub. We walked into the pub where the locals drink, And we pitched them the idea that we had, and they went, and Ian went, no, that's not the work. Because if you walk into the pub and they go, you haven't nailed it. If you can't explain it in one sentence and have the guys drinking beers be like, oh, fucking, that sounds a bit all right. And then we hit on the kind of idea for what the work became, and people started going, oh yeah, hey, you should call Norm. He's not gonna let you see his shed, but you should give him a call. And then you walk in and you're like, hi, we're artists, we're interested in you. Oh, do you want to see my shed? So a lot of what makes this regional work is having the right people on the ground who really deeply know and respect the community. Because the second that you come in and you're like, oh, hello, we're artists and we're here to bring you culture, it all falls apart because audiences are not interested in your bullshit. But if you're like, hey, you guys are the experts here and we think we can learn from you, and maybe we can co-create something together, that's when the work starts happening, when there's real respect for an audience. And I think often in regional settings especially, there's a bit of like, oh, the people here don't understand art. And people fucking understand art. You know, you get anyone in a gallery and they're going to have opinions about it. You just got to get them into the gallery. And that's where that really kind of tender and careful and respectful outreach is really integral. And then I think about working in the Philippines with Sipat Lawan Ensemble, extraordinary folks there who are like, we're not making shows in theaters, we're making shows in the middle of Manila. And there's going to be 700 audience members who are going to come to this show because it's free. It's in public space. It's going to go for 4 hours. And everyone's going to come because they know and they trust us, but we're bringing it to a site that they understand and that they know. So, yeah, a lot of it is just about being visible and saying, hey, like there's something going on here. Come and have a look. There you go. There's a very rambling response to your question.
Look, that was so great. And there's something enthralling about listening to you, Sarah. I feel like I could just sit here and listen.
It's the swearing, isn't it?
But no, it is like, I know like there's so much of that conversation around Geelong, like in terms of like there's lots of talk of like how do we get more people involved in the arts, but then it is always from that like almost like an us and them conversation. It's not like let's go and actually like talk to the people who live here. So I totally understand that, it's something that's really important is just like, I don't know, just creating an even playing field and asking people what they want and knowing that, like art, it doesn't have to be this wholly separate kind of, like wrapped up in academia kind of thing that's untouchable and no one can have an opinion. Like it is very much about like opening it all up and being transparent and recognizing that everybody has like a really fantastic and valid opinion on art and should be part of the conversation.
There's a reason that the Roan in Geelong show was like the biggest show that Geelong Galleries ever had. It's because people went, oh, I know that street artist. It's in the gallery. All right, I'll go into the gallery because I know the artist. I'm interested in the artist. And I think there was a bit of a kind of, the fine art community in Geelong where we'd be like, oh, I don't know if that's real art. But people were like, I was talking to a woman at the supermarket. She scanned my groceries. She was like, have you seen that Roan show at Geelong Gallery? It was the best thing I've seen in my entire life. It was so great. I told all my friends to go. And it's like, we set up these exhibitions and we're like, why is no one coming? And it's like, because why would they come? They read the wall text and it says, this is an ontological exploration of the, you like, if you're like street art, gallery, everyone's like, great, I understand it. So language is a big part of this too.
Totally, making it more relatable as well and not like hiding behind all that language as well. Just like, like art, like you were saying, Beck, art can just be like, fun, or it can just be joyous. It doesn't have to always be so serious and, like all of that. Dita, just to bring you into the conversation, I mean, you have a really interesting position between these kind of worlds, I guess working in a kind of council and organisational context, but also, as an independent practitioner as well. So I guess what shapes your kind of hybrid experience and how do you think about creating a sustainable and enriching kind of arts ecology in regional centres? What's your kind of weigh in on all of this?
Sure, thanks for that question, Amber. I might actually quickly continue what Sarah and Beck were saying and then come to your question right there. Talking about galleries in regional places, sometimes the audience of these galleries, like for example, I'm in Ballarat now and the Art Gallery of Ballarat, sometimes the audience is actually tourists that are visiting Ballarat. And why I say that is because last year I had an exhibition in the gallery, and I was talking about audience and new audiences, you know, all the types of discussions that we have while we are having shows and things like that. And I was talking about how I was really interested. So my show was, of course, about being Bengali in Ballarat. And I was talking about how I was really interested in getting, you know, South Asian audiences into the gallery space and things like that. And I was very surprised to know that the second, you know, amongst the different demographies and groups that visit the gallery, the second highest is the South Asian people that actually come to regional Victoria, to Ballarat as tourists, and they visit the gallery. So for me, I think that particular exhibition in Ballarat, we had a lot of really positive responses from the gallery. From the audiences that were visiting the gallery, to see their stories in a gallery space, to see that represented. But I guess that is something to consider and remember as well, that, you know, in these regional towns, the smaller towns where there are, you know, lots of different tourist attractions, the gallery seems to be a tourist attraction as well. So, you know, and it's quite interesting to know what kind of people are visiting and things like that. Going to your question, Amber, for me, I think it is a lot of the work that I do is around migrant experiences, and it comes from a very lived experience for me. So, you know, being a Bengali being an Indian person in Windham, or being an Indian person in Ballarat, and how that changes and shifts as well. Like, for example, you know, I've moved to Ballarat about 3 and some years ago, which was a year before the pandemic. And at that time, often I used to be the only person in the supermarket that looked like me. But now things have changed in 3 years, and it is very, very different. So I guess that for me feeds into my work, and the kind of things that I sort of try and create is, you know, I don't want to make a big splash, or I don't want to say, okay, by making this work, I'm going to, you know, change people's. It's nothing like that. What I often try and do is that I make something, or I do something that starts a conversation, or that sort of people look at it, go back and have a conversation in some other context. And that's what I'm trying to do with the kind of, not only with the kind of work that I make as an artist, but also the kind of projects that I try and produce, is having those connections or those conversations. Because often migrant, you know, we talk about migrant experiences, whether it is in a regional context or in the context of a city, we talk of it as very personal experiences. But really speaking, many of those are very universal, slightly different from each other, but really very universal experience. Doesn't matter whether your homeland was Kolkata or a small town in Queensland or somewhere in South America. You have moved. And that is migration, and that has influenced your living. So, you know, it is quite a universal thing, really.
Right. Oh, great. Thanks, Dita. I guess would you say that has been your biggest kind of learning, and the thing that's influenced your kind of work and practice the most is, I guess, the importance of, I guess, just, you know, that starting of a conversation. I mean, we're talking about connection between people and place, and I guess what we keep kind of circling back to, and what we keep touching on, is just how important, you know, the connection is the important part. And the connection is, I guess, then through having spaces, having places for people to meet, to talk, to find out who else kind of lives, you know, and talk about those kind of experiences as well. I guess, is that, yeah, I guess, what has your biggest learning been around?
I think the biggest learning that and of course, all of us are learning every day. I think at this stage, at this point in time, especially working in a regional context where people are arriving new people are arriving every day, it is quite important to understand, like for me, I think it is quite important to understand that people don't come with a blank slate. Like they have come in with diverse experiences, with a different culture, with lots of different stories and things like that. But there is always that dichotomy of starting from scratch. Everybody is starting from scratch at one point because they've just moved, or they're just trying to find other people, like-minded people, or they're just trying to, re-establish their lives in a different setting. But at the same time, they're trying to make this connection. So it's quite important to have that mindset, or I guess that openness, to know that everybody's coming in with some kind of that experience or that story. So everybody has that with them. And although they're starting from scratch, they're not really starting from scratch.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just to segue, we have like a question that's popped into our question box. So I would like to put that out to you all, and it does kind of fit with what we've been talking about. So the question is, we're sort of, we've gestured towards this us versus them dynamic in the way we talk and think about community in the arts. Is there value in thinking more about us? So thinking of the community as us through genuine connections instead of the us-them dichotomy that seems inherent in much art thinking and doing. Thoughts?
I have some thoughts. The traditional us and them, if you're talking about, the arbiters of culture, I'm the them. I come from the them. I grew up in a working class place. I'm an Aboriginal person. I'm a fat person. I didn't go to art school. I'm not a curator. My qualifications are in community cultural development and commerce. I'm very much the them, and like in terms of like being an outlier in both of the sectors that I work primarily in at the moment. So in the gallery sector and in performing arts sector, I am very much the them. And, I think about like my life and, the way that I think and the way that I am is very much in this idea of, I don't, like my own kind of personal story is around, like not fitting in the worlds of whiteness or blackness really, and always being in that in-between space. But I use that as like a platform and a way to kind of start to invite others in, because I understand what they might need from the us, from the other us, in order to feel like this is a place for them. But it's interesting to turn that idea around about who is us and who are we. And it was really interesting when I moved out to Morwell, and of course, every person that you meet, they've seen directors come and go. They each come with their own kind of like, views and ways of doing things. And they're like, oh, like, how long are you sticking around for? And where do you live? And when I say, oh, look, it's at least 5 years and I'm living in Morwell, in a street very much like yours. And then I tell them a bit where I'm from. You see the softening that happens, because there's no longer this kind of idea that, oh, this person's going to judge me, or this person like has a view on my experience. It's like, I've had some of the same experiences that you have. And that really drives like the way that I work, 1,000,000%. And everything that I've ever done has been from that perspective of, I'm the them, I'm those people that you talk about, those hard to reach cohorts. I'm one of them. And here I am, and I laugh about it. Like, and here I am, I'm gallery director and performing arts centre director. Like, who would have thought? Like a girl from Burnie would be here now. And I laugh about this a lot with my friend Kitty Taylor, who's the co-executive director of RAND. And her and her partner started that organisation because they saw a gap in Tasmania. They're like, there's actually no one who's representing the interests of the them in this arts ecology. And so they made that space. And then they've grown that organisation to then, like manage the Regional Arts Fund and a whole bunch of other kind of great projects that really much like talk to the thems, the hard to reach thems. So I think the real answer to all of this is that the thems need to be in the positions of decision making, and the thems need to be invited in to help inform that decision making. And so if we've always got the us's, driving that conversation and deciding like where things need to go, nothing's ever going to change, because systems of oppression really love to reinforce themselves. And I know that's a really bold statement to make, but when I have conversations with my colleagues, and this is in both sectors, they don't seem to see how they're complicit in perpetuating this systemic exclusion and oppression. And until we actually crack that open, and until we actually invite people in to have really like good, solid conversation about it. And I know for me, like what really shifted my gears in my thinking was a lunch that I had with a young artist called Wani. He's an amazing guy, he's originally from the Congo. And he just challenged me on all of my stuff. And I walked away from that conversation and went, all right, you're right. I'm going to change. And it's up to people in these positions of power, the users, to actually have them conversations and start to shift their perspective around and actually turn that around. And I think that's the only way it's going to happen, frankly.
Yeah, no, it's so great. And I mean, if we think that, you know, I guess art at its very kind of basic sense is supposed to, you know, it's so intrinsically tied in with like people and identity and who we are and our sense of self. And there's, you know, that I guess that's why all these kind of conversations are always going to be kind of wrapped up in art, because, you know, it needs to be a space that we're constantly learning, where, you know, the offerings are authentic and genuine, and it's, you know, it should, yeah, there should be these conversations between the us and the thems, or how can we kind of almost like amalgamate that into just, you know, like a sense of a more kind of, I don't know, like an ecology where, you know, maybe one day these conversations aren't so kind of polarized or so some great kind of reflections there, Beck. Thank you, and thanks for being so generous in sharing that. I wondered, Dita and Sarah, if you have anything to kind of that you want to talk, that you want to bring into that as well.
Yeah, I think it's worth pointing out that that us and them divide is not so much a they're the community and we're not the community divide, as we've got the money and the power and the spaces and the decision-making power, and they're the people who come. And it's, you know, working as a freelance artist is kind of weirdly like floating between those two states of being, because certainly in Geelong, I came in being like, what's here? And the answer was like, there are certain things here, but they're not necessarily welcoming to, and, you know, I'm a pretty informed arts audience member, and I'm still kind of like, I don't know if that's for me. I don't know if that's for me. I think also the thing that's really easy to forget, if you get a person and you're like, how do we make people come somewhere? It's like, well, we have a party. Like, where are the parties? We're not having nearly enough parties. And I don't just mean like it's nighttime, there's a DJ playing, there's beer, but like let's get everyone together and have some sort of ceremony of beginning and welcoming, and then we have a chat and then we end it. Like, where is that happening? And so often it's not. Like the ceremony that we're having is we have an opening, and the opening is for the VIPs who've donated to the space, and then there's 4 council members who give really boring speeches, and then everyone gets a glass of champagne and claps about how clever we are, and then we all go home. But yeah, this kind of like, where are we getting together? Where are we actually pulling a community and drawing new communities? There was a street art walk in Geelong recently where just like 200 people turned up and were like, hi, I want to see the street art. And it's like, oh, fuck, we're like, look at this art audience who got out on a cold night to come see this thing. They're here. We're just not making stuff that they feel comfortable coming to. Yeah, so, and you know, you spoke, Beck, about how all your artists were like, oh, we don't, who's here? We don't know who's here. And when there were consultations happening in sometime in the last kind of mess of the last 2 years, where I was pulled in to consult on Geelong's art strategy along with a bunch of other artists. And all of us were like, oh my God, oh, you're here. Oh, I didn't, fuck, how do we talk to each other? And everyone said, we need somewhere to go. We need an afternoon on a Sunday where we can come and have beers and talk. And then that didn't happen. But yeah, it's like, where's the place that we go that we don't have to pay to go to, where we can just come and be together and meet each other and have fun.
And that is so important, isn't it, Sarah? There is this concept of, it's called an adda, ADDA in Bengali. And this is just a concept where every day, you know, people, after they have finished what they are doing, they just get together in the crossings and things like that, where there are little shacks that sell tea, and they just stand around and discuss stuff. or they just sit around, in a house, we just sit around, have cups of tea, and we discuss stuff. Sometimes we'll discuss things like how we could change the world, and at other times it's just what did you have for lunch. But really, if I think that is quite an important part, where I think we find each other within, like, there are so many practicing artists. There are so many people who are interested, and they might not be practicing artists or working in the arts industry, but just interested in the arts, or just wanting to do more or know more. So it's quite important to actually create those kinds of like-minded people getting together and having conversations, and not really thinking that each of those conversations is going to have an outcome or anything like that, but just really getting together and having conversations. So what are you doing? What project are you working on? And strange things happen from out of those conversations, like collaborations, partnerships. Oh, I've got these opportunities. Now I know that person there, and that can happen. So it's really important to do those kinds of informal art sessions, I guess.
Yeah, I really like I read articulated very nicely the other day that said, if you're looking for an opportunity, you're actually looking for a person, because opportunities are always attached to people. And so that means that artists can support each other in that way, but it also means that we can offer opportunities to audience members. And sometimes we're the opportunity, we're the person that can go into a community group or a strata and be like, hey, just so you know, there's this thing going on. Do you want to be part of it? So I think we're really good at thinking about structures and institutions and organizations, and forgetting that actually what makes things happen are people and relationships. And so once we start really prioritizing those things, that's when we start having a really healthy ecology.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, I guess like just a really quick example of something we did at Platform was kind of an open call exhibition for a month, where anybody could come into the gallery, bring a work, hang it up themselves. And we found that so many, over the course of the month, people were just coming in to hang out, but also they felt like they had this ownership over the show, or it was like reflecting them, or, they'd come in to see where the progress was at, or to meet other artists. And it was maybe the first time I'd really felt that sense of like community in the gallery space, or that it was inhabited by like people and an energy and a conversation outside of those kind of really structured art experiences, or, the way that you, I guess, kind of formally put a show on. It was sort of the opposite. Yeah, I found like how important those just like chances and spaces to meet other people, and so many things have kind of come out of that for artists as well. They've kind of met their people, their community, and so I guess like a bit of a segue or a question for us to think about is, we hear a lot, especially Geelong, Sarah, we hear a lot about these kind of, designated creative cities, or, this idea of like establishing these creative epicentres. But, I guess how do we actually, because I think, even though Geelong's designated as one of those, like maybe we're not being so successful. I'm not saying we're failing, but how important is artistic agency actually, rather than kind of these official titles and designations? And it's a question for all of you as well, I guess, in terms of what do we need, or how do we make artists feel like they have agency? Because it's such an important part, I guess, of that connection and that, sense of people and place.
Personally, I find the idea of like designating a creative city like really problematic, like a range of levels. I can't even begin. It sets up this kind of like, this like, I guess, a false dichotomy of, this is creative activity and this is your hobby, and then this is, like a bit of fun and leisure over here, and, this is creative industry is all about, how we participate economically. And, don't get me wrong, like, putting my commerce hat on, like I am a business boss, 1,000,000%. And if people can make money out of stuff, like I'm all for it. But that's not the only measure. And I feel like these creative city kind of ideas is about like commodifying people's kind of innate sense of, making, and their innate sense of, creating. And then it becomes something that's like saleable, and then it becomes part of your tourism strategy. And then it kind of loses kind of all connection to the people that it's actually there for. And, you know, I find it interesting when talking about, like, you know, we're really great at setting up these structures. Well, that's just another framework. That's just another way to control how people interact with each other. And we've already got like enough kind of frames that we, you know, kind of like force our, you know, our social and creative kind of, you know, output and connection into. We have institutions like galleries and performing arts centres and, you know, these things that we set up. And a creative city, it's like, well, that's just, you know, I mean, can people just stop referencing Richmond, Florida, please? Please, enough already. I mean, a really healthy and functioning community and economy is one that is diverse, you know, and diversity comes in all different ways. So there's cultural diversity, there's access diversity, there's gender diversity, there's body diversity, there's all of these, there's economic participation diversity, there's opinion diversity, there's all of these kind of like different bits and pieces and lenses that when you kind of put them all together, like it makes a really full place. And our economy and our culture is the same like that. It's the diversity that actually makes it like an interesting, cool, engaging place with a little bit of grit, you know. And yeah, creative cities, hate it. Strong opinions.
I might actually come to it from a slight, sorry, Sarah, I'll just might come to it from a slightly different perspective there, Beck. I wouldn't I actually wouldn't choose between love or hate, but living in Ballarat, Ballarat is the UNESCO City of Craft, and actually, you know, it has come in the last 2 years. There has been a lot of success in that particular area. So there is this new thing that has started in the last, so I curated the first event, which was last year. And then another new curator did it this year. And it is the Craft Lab, which basically brought 18 participants to get 18 craft people together. And I don't know if you know of the mining exchange building, which has got these alcoves. It's a beautiful old building, which has got these alcoves. And there were these 2 weekends, which had all these practitioners working together, demonstrating their work. And at the same time, throughout the center, there was, you know, there was like an exhibition that had the exemplars of the works that either those creators or other artists had made. But what it has done for them, for these artists, really, it has sort of given them a sense of community and given them a sense of space and a sense of belonging. And the fact that their practice has been elevated to some extent and has been brought, packaged to some extent, of course, but has been brought out in a way where lots and lots of people. So the footfall last year was the first event. The last year was 2,500 people, whereas this year it was 4,000 people. And last year the event actually won the, I won't be able to tell you what award it was, but it was some kind of a gold tourism award, Australia-wide tourism award, I think it was. But what it did for these people was that exposure. So some of them have been picked up now by Craft Victoria. Others have got lots of new commissions. There's lots of interest in their practice and things like that. And it has created for them not just that sense of community, but to some extent a sustainable practice as well, craft practice within a regional town, like within Ballarat. So that's why I said by coming into the same discussion from a slightly different perspective, really. Sorry, Sarah, I cut you off there.
No, don't apologize at all. I think I want to just pull out something that, Beck, you said when you were sort of talking about this shift that you spearheaded, where you said, you know, a lot of municipal areas, they have a lot of space and they've got a lot of stuff. So we gave the space and the stuff to the community and to the artists. And that generosity is the real key in working with community and creating a really like healthy ecology, is being like, what do we have? We'll give it to people. And what that involves is an element of risk. And Geelong is very bad at the risk. Like you walk in and you're like, hey, we could make this absolutely unbelievable thing, but we need a bit of money from you and we need some space. And they're like, oh, you're going to apply for some funding. And then you're like, yeah, but you've never funded public art, like participatory public art. And they're like, yeah, oh, well, you could apply. And you're like, well, that's a 7-month turnaround. Like, what, the show's in 6 months, what are we going to do? And there's a real kind of sense of like, oh yeah, all these things are possible, but maybe they're not possible for us to help you with. And so once you start being like, okay, we're a city of design, God knows why, because we invented the ute, I guess, the Ford factory, maybe that's why. If we can open the Ford factory, where's all the stuff? Like, why aren't we facilitating this enormous space and being like, okay, what are we doing now? What can we build here? Because I think Geelong is really good at being like, oh, have you got a touring show? We'd love it. But they're not very good at being like, hey, you're a mid-career artist who's really talented and you're connected to a whole bunch of other mid-career artists and curators who are very experienced. We're gonna trust you that if we open some doors, you'll fill that space with something really interesting and exciting, and you'll bring people in. So that generosity is absolutely key. And I really commend you for being aware that those resources exist and that you can actually give them to people.
And yet, great point, Sarah. So much of it is about, I guess, getting, I don't want to say like getting the money in the hands of the right people, but like, you know, if like, I think sometimes the structures that hold the money in regional centres aren't kind of open to kind of giving that over to, you know, and even if it is to the spaces who are willing to engage and have more experimental or other kind of art practices, or giving it to the artists themselves, like how can we facilitate like more of a kind of exchange between those kind of, between structures and artists to kind of get those experiences to audience? Because I think the audience is really interested. You know, you imagine in Geelong if we got, you know, everyone into the Ford factory for this huge kind of arts kind of project, like it would be, you know, you would have the entirety of Geelong there, like, because that's, you know, there's like a real want for it. So yeah, it's totally sometimes a bit of a disconnect, I think, between resources, not wanting to take creative risk. I know like councils can be very risk adverse, especially, you know, regional ones. Yeah, so totally. I think we've got a few minutes, so that's why my eyes are on the clock. But I guess just like one final kind of quick whip around question, if we can fit it in, would be, I guess, you know, the impact that geographical, social and environmental factors have on working within a regional arts context are embedded in these conversations around connection, practice, and the importance of a strong and viable place-based creative ecology. I guess we've kind of talked about how important it is that artists are able to remain in regional and rural areas and have a viable practice. But I guess if you had to kind of say one or two things about the most important thing that helps that to happen, like what would that be? It's a big question to do quickly, I know, but like, is it money? Is it, you know, obviously, you know, money, space, you know, I guess just a quick thought on like the most important elements of creating a viable, sustainable regional arts practice.
I can certainly say, like, from like an institutional perspective, for us, it's about like looking to what's around you. And when I'm thinking about how do I prioritize our resources, so the things that, you know, I look to our immediate, then I look to our region, and then I look to the rest of Victoria. And so that's the priority that I give on things when I'm thinking about like where do I invest. And having that shift kind of to happen more broadly probably takes, you know, a bit of a generational shift as well. So like what you'll notice is that a lot of the people that are like holding, you know, senior roles at like councils or institutions are starting to age out. And so it's with that kind of generational change that we may see that change. And, you know, I believe that the regions are where it's at. That's why I'm here. And it's actually what attracted me to La Trobe, that it is a place in like really deep transition, and it's exciting, you know. And I'm what one might call a mid-career arts manager, you know. And it's what got me here, you know. I could have had a very cushy job for the rest of my life if I needed to, and it was a really great place to be. But the challenge of actually coming to somewhere like La Trobe, where it's, you know, it's just so much possibility, and I think that's kind of where you kind of build that hook for sustainable practices. It's actually a bit more possible. There's a bit more space in the regions. Yeah.
Great, thanks, Beck. Sarah and Dita, your final thoughts.
I think I'll answer that question in one word from the context of being an independent artist working in the region, and that is connection. I think that's the most important thing that I think has helped me do the things that I'm doing. And yeah, over to you, Sarah.
I mean, speaking as an artist who is increasingly starting to be like, I think I'm going to have to go back to Melbourne because I don't think this is sustainable for me, money, and allowing, like, opening the doors to energy. Because I think my experience has been a lot of kind of throwing myself against doors like a kind of possum trying to get out of a house, being like, hey, we've got everything we need. We have all of the stuff, just let us do it. And we've been getting a lot of like, except I must note that Platform is doing really extraordinary work in supporting artists and supporting audiences and being this kind of beacon of glory and contemporary critically engaged generosity in the region.
Great, thanks. There's a lovely little compliment there at the end. But you're right. It takes these, like, you know, in these communities, it takes these people, these places, and the ones that are like willing to kind of, you know, invest and entrust artists to create, you know, that work. Absolutely, it is just handing over the control, which is, you know, it's a wonderful and liberating thing, actually, and some really amazing outcomes come out of it in an arts context. I want to say a huge thank you to our panelists, Beck, Sarah and Anandita. Thank you for your generosity and insights. I feel like I could keep chatting for another hour, but I know that we have to kind of wrap things up. But thank you for sharing, you know, like, I guess your kind of personal experience, your knowledge, your insights, and things that you've learned throughout your career so far. I'm sure it's been a really enriching and interesting conversation for the audience members as well. Thank you to our audience members for coming along and for valuing this kind of important discussion. And I guess also a thank you to Regional Arts Australia, and also kind of Alana Hunt and Scott Howie and the Artlands team for having us and for organising such an important and enriching conversation series. So I hope everyone has a wonderful day as well. And thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Amber. And also I'd like to thank our Auslan interpreters and our closed caption subtitlers. Today's been the last of our conversations for a little while. We're taking a break and heading into a bit of research land. So I think this is a fantastic way to finish up very, very provocative questions around who's in power and how that power is slowly eroding away and being given over to the people who need it more. So thank you very much, everybody, and please, as I said, stay in touch. Make sure you're on our socials or our newsletter so that you know when we've got other fascinating conversations and opportunities to get together. Cheers.
Great. Thanks.